Welcome to another episode of Image Rights by N. Mashinini, the only podcast dedicated to image rights in Africa and around the globe. Lately, we have had a lot of issues around influencer marketing, and I find it interesting that there is quite a huge development of how people are learning about personal branding and exploiting their personalities commercially and online on social media. And so I thought it was a good opportunity to invite Gail Schimmel to come and actually give us a brief overview of the work that the Advertising Regulatory Board is doing in this space. So Gail is a BA Honors Psychology graduate, and she also has an LLB and an LLM, which are actually, interestingly enough, from the University of the Witwatersrand. And she has worked as a lecturer, an attorney, as well as a consultant, and she's now the CEO of the Advertising Regulatory Board and also a best-selling novelist. Hi, Gail.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I must just correct you, my LLM is not from WITS, unfortunately. I took the lazy way with my LLM and did a coursework UNISA one. Possibly if I'd done a WITS one, I'd know a bit more. But yeah, thank you so much for having me this morning.
Well, I think it's always good to diversify your portfolio anyway. So it's not a lazy way. It's actually the brave way.
Trust me on this one.
So I find it quite interesting that, a lot has been going on in advertising. There's a lot of disputes between companies, but there's also this interesting rise of influencers and brand ambassadors who are not disclosing their ambassador and influencer agreements when they market content on social media. And so I wanted to invite you here to ask you a couple of questions so that we could help the audience to understand that in exploiting their identity and their personality, as much as they have image rights to protect that, they also have certain responsibilities. And particularly from the ARB's perspective, the Advertising Regulatory Board. So the first question I have for you today is, what is the role of the ARB in influencer marketing?
So the role of the ARB is what the role of the ARB is in any marketing. We are a self-regulatory organization, so we're not a government organization. We are the marketing industry came together and agreed that we need rules and we need someone who can make fair, objective decisions about those rules. We make decisions about the content of advertising, wherever that advertising appears. And what's very important to understand, we are a reactive organization. We have to have a complaint to take any steps. So when it comes to influencer marketing, for us, influencer marketing is just another type of advertising. What is interesting about it is we don't regard the influencer as the advertiser. We regard the influencer as a type of media. The brand is the advertiser, and they are using the influencer to carry their message. So if one takes the analogy back to old school advertising, the influencer is like the magazine or the TV channel or the radio channel in that they carry the advertising. So when we get a complaint, we actually go to the brand. We don't go to the influencer. If the influencer is successful in what they do, the brand is going to benefit. So if the influencer breaks rules in what they do, the brand must account for it.
Wow. And I never thought that's the perspective that the ARB is taking on this. But it does make quite a lot of sense because these days we flip through magazines less and we flip through social media much more.
Exactly.
And so all social media pages and what they post is like, a magazine or some form of media. So what I also...
I'm glad you used that analogy because that's exactly the issue we're dealing with. That when you flip through a magazine, you have a right to know what is an article and what is an advert. And normally it's easy to tell, but in the old days, the rule was that if it was an advertorial, so if it was something that could look like content, it must be clearly labeled advertorial. You're not old enough to remember the very bulky advertorials we used to see in magazines, but it really was something quite weird. But now, as you flip through social media, you have a right to know what is content and what is advertising.
And typically you find that influencers will mask the advertising element. So I remember Kim Kardashian, this is exactly what she found herself in when she posted that my friends just told me about this and this crypto, and she didn't disclose that this is actually an advertising, part of an advertising deal that I have. So what I find interesting is the deception involved in this kind of advertising, because people who follow Kim Kardashian probably just assume that she really just heard about this crypto from a friend, and that this is just something that she's finding interesting and lucrative for herself. So it's quite interesting, this kind of marketing. And I think this is why it has caught on so much. It's the fact that brands are able to sort of incept in their consumer's mind that a particular product or service is good because X, Y, or Z is using it.
So it's exactly the type of situation that the rules are trying to avoid. The rules say that you should have hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored if you are in the situation where you're being paid for your opinion. If I can take a step back, we regard the influencer's comments as advertising if they have been given anything in exchange for their opinion. So if they've been paid, or if they've been given something, or if they've been given use of something, they need to disclose that. And the recommended way is hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored, but there are other ways they can disclose it. Sometimes they make it very clear in the actual content of the social media. So sometimes they'll say, I've been lucky enough to receive this car to test drive from so-and-so. They allowed me to test drive it for a week and I've loved it. And then they're disclosing exactly what happened, exactly what they got in exchange, and then that's fine. It's all about taking the consumer into your confidence. So to look at, the argument is exactly what you say, that brands seem to think that if you don't know that the influencer has been paid, you're going to be more influenced by what they say. And to some extent, they are absolutely right. Because if you think something is someone's genuine opinion versus a paid for opinion, you attach different weight from it. Listen, I think you've got to be drunk to be taking financial advice from Kim Kardashian, but that's another debate. But obviously, if you admire her and you think that she's someone who knows what she's doing with her money, if you think it's her genuine opinion, you're going to be very influenced by that. If you know she's been paid, you might still be influenced by it, because you might believe in her ethics and believe that she would only accept the payment if she believed in the product. And this is where it becomes interesting, because why will we believe in an influencer's ethics? Because we see them behaving in an ethical way. And one of the ways an influencer can behave in an ethical way is by disclosing hashtag ad, hashtag sponsored. My personal theory is if over time we're going to see that consumers will have more trust in the influencers who are revealing that they've been paid, who are doing the correct thing, and less trust in the influencers who they can see it's advertising material. And, consumers are not stupid. They can see it's advertising and they can see that their influencer is not revealing what the actual relationship is, and they're going to lose trust in that influencer. So I believe over time, the influencers who are correctly labeling their advertising are going to have more influence than the ones who not. But at the moment, we're in that in-between where, first of all, I'm hearing very disturbingly that some brands are telling influencers not to use those hashtags, which is very worrying. And that's another reason we go back to the brand, because what is in that brand contract? What has the brand told the influencer to do? There are other brands who go, we only use you if you correctly label hashtag this, hashtag that. So we're in this worrying time where people aren't seeing there's a bigger picture than this tweet or this post or this picture. There's a bigger picture about being perceived as an ethical influencer.
Wow, interesting. I think it's also quite important from an image rights perspective for someone to be careful about what they associate themselves with when it comes to the ethics involved in this kind of influencer marketing. But what I also found interesting was a question of jurisdiction in a way, because we also have a Broadcasting Complaints Commission in South Africa. And it also has its own codes of conduct about content that appears on air. And what I wondered was, where does the ARB sit in the bigger picture when we already have a Broadcasting Complaints Commission?
So there is no overlap at all. The Broadcasting Complaints Commission deals with the content of programming. We deal with the content of advertising. And we actually work quite carefully together. If we have material where it's at all grey about, is this advertising or is this programming, we work together to figure out who has the correct jurisdiction. We actually have an interesting issue at the moment where neither of us have jurisdiction over a certain type of material. But it's nothing to do with the topic at hand. But so there's no, and the Electronic Communications Act actually recognizes the Advertising Standards Authority as the correct body for advertising. And then we're very lucky because whoever drafted that act was really clever and realized that the Advertising Standards Authority might not always be the body. And the definition of the Advertising Standards Authority is so broad that the ARB has actually been able to step into the shoes of the ASA in terms of that definition.
So you mentioned that this is the ARB is a private body and it has no relation to government and so forth. I'm also aware that it has not no relation at all, but it is not governed by government.
Yes.
So I was interested in finding out from you about to what extent do you actually engage with influencers? Because you do say that you are a reactive body, right? So in being reactive, how do you draw the line between acting on a complaint from a consumer and when one of your parties within the ARB pick up something that an influencer is doing? Do you bring that up as well, or what are the rules there?
Okay, so we only act on a complaint. We cannot monitor advertising. I think one of the things that people don't realize, we are tiny. We do not have the resources to be monitoring advertising, because if you monitor advertising, you've got to do it in a really fair way. It can't be that I happen to drive down Jan Smuts Avenue every morning and therefore all the billboards on Jan Smuts Avenue are going to get checked out by me. But I never drive down maybe William Nicol, and therefore if you put your billboard on William Nicol, you're going to be safe from me. So you've got to have a really fair way of monitoring advertising, and we just don't have the resources to do that. So we act only on complaints. And, sometimes it's really frustrating because sometimes we see something really wrong and we can't do anything about it. And we are very ethical, so we would not nudge a consumer to lay a complaint just because we think it's something that should be complained about. So we only act on complaints. We engage on an educational level. When the code about influencer marketing was launched, we did a lot of talking about it. We did a lot of interacting with the influencer community. We had a period then where influencers were quite bought into it. That has dropped a bit. It's been a few years, and we are seeing a drop rather than a rise in the use of the hashtags, which is very worrying and maybe indicative that we need to do more education again.
Perhaps it's an issue of it maybe being off-putting to the audience that the influencers are trying to reach. Speaking of off-putting advertisements, I remember there was one particular advertisement by Hippo that really, really got a lot of South Africans upset, where they used Katlahomabe's lookalike in an advert where we see a woman in a car who's basically, they're using the model layout of a typical OUTsurance advertisement.
Yeah.
And OUTsurance took issue with that and complained that they're using their brand properties in this advertisement. And what I found interesting from an image rights perspective was that by calling it brand properties as part of this complaint that OUTsurance had, my challenge was, can we really claim that it's all of OUTsurance's brand properties when OUTsurance disassociated itself from Katlego a few years ago? And I wondered, did the ARB ever receive any complaints about this particular advertisement, and how were they dealt with if there were complaints?
Okay, so unfortunately, OUTsurance chose to go to court instead of coming to the ARB initially. This is 100% a matter that the ARB deals with. That type of brand property is kind of exactly what we do. So we've got part of our work is protecting consumers from misleading complaints and offensive advertising and all that type of thing. Part of our work is protecting brands from other brands using their brand properties. And we see it wider than IP law. We see it differently from IP law. You don't have to have a registered trademark to have ownership of an advertising property. So we are the ideal forum for that type of complaint. But they took it to court. And what happened in court is they went on an urgent basis. And the court refused to hear it on an urgent basis. They then brought it to us, but they hadn't withdrawn it from court. And we have a rule that says we cannot have a matter that is being heard by another forum, because it makes no sense. If court finds one thing, we find another thing. Who do you listen to? Well, obviously you listen to the court. But, it makes no sense to have two forums considering the same question at once. And OUTsurance didn't withdraw their court action in order to bring it to the ARB. So it has never come before the ARB. And consumers didn't complain. Consumers, it's not the type of thing. Consumers don't protect a brand's property. I'm not sure what I would have done if they had, because I'm not. Yeah, it would have been a difficult one. I'm glad they didn't. Consumers who are listening, please don't.
They took it to Twitter instead. There's a lot on Twitter about complaints.
That's a really interesting phenomenon, because what we're seeing is a lot of complaining is about being heard. You want someone to hear you. And we're seeing a lot of the matters that blow up on Twitter, and we're like, oh my God, clear your desk. We're going to get a big complaint about this. So, for example, a few years ago, the H&M issue with the child and the monkey, we were like, clear our desks. We're going to get complaints about this. This is going to be a real problem. We didn't receive a single complaint. And I think it's because people were airing their grievance on Twitter, and they actually achieved what they needed to. They got the ad withdrawn. They achieved that on Twitter. So they had no need of us. So that's been a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, interesting. And to the contrary, with the Hippo and OUTsurance issue, even though people complained on Twitter, the ad still ran for a couple of weeks.
That is, not every brand is going to listen to everyone on Twitter. And rightly so. If we all listened to everyone on Twitter, we'd go completely mad. So, I'm quite an active Twitter user. I'm very worried that Elon's going to take it away from us. But you can't listen to the people on Twitter, because a lot of the people on Twitter are either not actually people or are mad. But brands, they weigh up and they take what they have to. But it's changed the complaint pattern for us a bit.
I really think that it's quite important to also understand whether influencers themselves can bring complaints to the ARB where a lookalike is used in an advert, especially in a case where the brand has previously disassociated themselves from the influencer or even the celebrity. Okay. Do you hear any complaints like that? Is it within your jurisdiction?
Very interesting question. So we've never got a complaint like that. I think we'd have to turn to the code. There's the first thing that comes up and then almost is immediately rejected by my brain is that we have a clause on exploitation of privacy. Nobody can use your image without your permission if you are a private person. It's slightly different if you're a celebrity, and then there's slightly different rules. But if you are a private person, Nobody can use your image. And if you are a celebrity, no one can use your image in a way that exploits it. But that wouldn't the case use outlining. It's not your image. It's a lookalike's image. And a person who looks like you shouldn't be banned from ever having their face out there just because they look like you. So then the next question would be, is it misleading? Is it used in such a way that the consumer believes that that is the person? Or is it quite clear that that is not the person? And that would depend on the situation. And I am not going to comment on the outsurance issue because there is still a chance it could come before us in some form.
Yeah. I think I can comment because I'm not working for the ARB. Because the first time I saw that advertisement, for a second I thought it was Katlego, and then I looked again and I realized, no, it's not. But then I also wondered, with cases like this, so not specifically about HIPPO and outsurance, but the kind of context it presents us with. HIPPO and outsurance are not competitors.
Yeah, it's not only competitors who can have their advertising properties exploited. They are in the same industry. So in a sense, they're competitors, even though not competitive, they're not selling the same product, but they are in the same industry. And we do have matters where you can be in completely different industries and your property can be exploited. And then it would depend that would be one of the factors we consider, definitely, that whether or not it's the same industry. But there can be situations where you're in completely different industries, yet your property is exploited.
Quite interesting. Well, I look forward to see what the ARB is going to come out with, because I'm seeing that your presence on LinkedIn is growing quite a lot. Since you're having a lot more cases. I remember with the lottery advertisements, there were quite a number of important influencer-related issues as well. So on that note, could you maybe share at least one or two tips or a piece of advice for influencers and brand ambassadors who are on the come up about what to avoid to not get into trouble with the ARB?
I'm probably going to be a bit repetitive here, but the first thing is you have to reveal the nature of your arrangement with the brand. So if you have been paid in any way, shape, or form, that has to be clear from your I want to say tweet, but obviously it's not only tweet, it's many, many other things. Whatever it is you're doing, you've got to be clear. Hashtag ad, hashtag sponsored, those are going to keep you safe. You might want to do it another way. The code does allow that it could be another way. The hashtag brand ambassador, we haven't considered it exactly. It worries me because it doesn't make clear the relationship exactly. But that is one that we are seeing a lot of. But if you just say exactly what has happened, you can't go wrong. I was paid to tell you that. And they're clever ways, I always say to people, because creative people are always going, well, we can't keep the rules, and it's hot. You are a better creative if you can be creative within the rules. Anyone can be creative outside the boundaries of rules. It's like I always quote that Mark Twain letter, I'm sorry I wrote a long letter, I didn't have the time to write a short one. It's the same concept, that a proper creative can be creative within the rules. And if you find that too hard, maybe you're not clever enough. So that's the first thing. Use the hashtags, reveal what your situation is. And then the second thing is, remember that all the other rules of advertising apply to you. Don't mislead. Don't use false claims. Don't exploit someone else's product. Don't be cruel to animals. Don't harm children. There are a whole lot of rules. It is actually the brand's job to make sure, because the brand will normally actually tell the influencer what to say. So there'll be a number of approved kind of content, and the advertising agency will actually have created the content depending on what sort of brand we're talking about. So sometimes the influencer's left to their own devices, but the brand should be telling you what the true claims are. And you should don't go mad. They've carefully crafted their claims. Don't add something that you think is true. Don't try and make it sound better, because maybe that wording is so exact because they know just outside that wording, they're not true anymore. So that, and then the last thing I would say is trust your gut and have a sense of ethics. If you know that the claim cannot be true, don't look at how much they're paying you. Look at what it's doing for your overall brand that you are telling a lie. Because yes, maybe you're going to sell the weight loss product to 100 people today and the brand's going to be happy with you. But those 100 people who don't lose any weight, and they won't, are going to then you're going to lose them as followers down the line. Think big picture, have an ethical outlook, and trust your gut.
Very true. I couldn't have said it any better. Straight from the CEO of the ARB. So in closing, could you share maybe where people can get in touch with you and the ARB, especially if consumers want to lay a complaint regarding advertising issues on social media, etc.?
Please don't lay a complaint on social media. You'll get a little response from me telling you not to. The only place you can lay a complaint to, you can email us, complaint@arb.org.za. But the best way is go to our website. There's an online form. So www.arb.org.za. There's an online form, and then we'll get all the information we need, and we won't need to come back to you. Please know we do use your name. We do reveal your name. You cannot lodge an anonymous complaint, and that is an international norm. And then the other thing is you can follow us on social media. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Facebook. Twitter is at the moment the best one, and we're most on top of that. LinkedIn, we're getting there. Facebook to some extent. Listen, I know we should start a TikTok account, but I'm over 40, and you're... I just don't know if I can. So that's where we're at the moment.
I'm scared that if you start a TikTok account, you're going to go there and then find all the advertising rules being broken on TikTok.
No, I mean, listen, I've got teenage children. I'm exposed to TikTok. It exhausts me. We also have a YouTube channel. And what's really useful on the YouTube channel is we have short lessons kind of thing. So it's 5 minutes. It's not going to take a lot of time out of your day, but you can listen to it and learn more about the ARB. And if there's a question we're not answering there, please drop us a line on social media and we will do a video answering your question.
Okay, so questions can go on social media, but complaints need to go on the form on the website.
Exactly, yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Gail. This was a very interesting and educational conversation for me as well, and I hope the listeners enjoy it.
I hope so.
Remember to control your image rights. This podcast is based on research supported by the National Research Foundation of South Africa, grant number 121887. But the views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not represent the National Research Foundation, its management and governmental structures.